Hello and welcome to a very interesting panel, I would say. But first of all, let me welcome you to the Global Media Forum. It's always a big pleasure for us at Deutsche Welle to see so many people coming from different countries, having different perspectives. And we always say it's good to talk, it's good to agree, and it's also good to disagree. And I think this panel might be something like this. My name is Jafar Abdelkarim, and I'm a host at Deutsche Welle, and very pleased today to host this panel. Maybe today you already did it, or yesterday. If you're zapping through TV channels, reading different articles, or scrolling through social media, you'll notice something striking. When it comes to reporting on Gaza and Israel, one headline calls it self-defense, and then you scroll, and another headline calls it genocide or a war crime. This panel explores and wants to understand how journalists and media institutions, especially we're focusing on Europe and the US, report on this conflict. Why? Because language we use matters. Headlines shape perception. Words frame a narrative, and editorial choices we do influence public opinion. Today, so-called Western mainstream media are facing growing criticism, biased and selective, sometimes loud and sometimes silent, depending who is suffering. So I want today to ask and understand the following questions. What shapes the choice of words, headlines, and narratives when it comes to Gaza and Israel? Is reality today becoming a matter of perspective? And finally, journalists would understand this so well, what does this mean for public trust and for the responsibility and credibility of journalism in times of war? We have around 45 minutes where we're all going to discuss together, and I'm very happy to welcome my guests. People who are here in the room just followed the panel where all women were sitting, and now we have an all-men panel. Pooh! So, just to mention that, but I informed myself, and GMF told me that all in all, the amount of speakers of women are higher than men. And now I want to welcome the gentlemen. I want to welcome Hanno Hauenstein. Please join us. Is a Berlin-based independent journalist and author. His reporting has appeared in various publications, including The Guardian, The Intercept, Haaretz, and Frankfurter Rundschau. Nice that you're today with us. An applause. Coming from the US, is a co-founder of Politico Europe and former editor-in-chief of Politico. He helped grow Politico into a leading transatlantic publication and let it sail to Axel Springer. He reported for the Wall Street Journal and Financial Times. Matthew Kaminsky, welcome. And I also want to welcome Dr. Rainer Esser. He is the COO of Die Zeit, one of the most famous and leading weekly multimedia print and online newspaper here in Germany. Welcome. And we were not satisfied with having all-man panel, and that's why we said we'll keep this seat free. But for women and men and divers. So any one of you, while we're talking, while we're discussing, and says like, oh, I want to comment on that, you're always welcome to join us. You come, you sit, introduce your name, ask a question, comment on one of the gentlemen, and then you would leave again. So any one of you. Why? Because we said that perspective matters. And every perspective of every person who's here in this room matters. So now it's in your hand. Because what usually happens when we finish the discussion, that they say, yeah, but you didn't talk about this. But you didn't say that. So now you have the opportunity to join us and say whatever you want and feel free to say whatever you want. Deal? Okay, thank you. So now we're going to start, and I want to start with you, Hanno. For preparing this panel, I read different pieces that you wrote. And in a piece that you published on the page of Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung, under the title Israel's Dirty Work and Germany's Staatsräson, there's a sentence that you wrote. And you said, while Israel is committing genocide in Gaza, Germany continues to offer support. So I was asking, when did you start using the term genocide in your coverage, and why?
Around a year ago, but I think in order to contextualize your question, I think for me personally, the distinction between being a journalist and being an activist is incredibly important. I'm not an activist. I have I'm led by guiding principles. I find it very important that we draw this distinction, and I'm also not a lawyer. But the term is not strictly only a legal term. It's also a term that conveys an intellectual legacy that goes back to Raphael Lemkin. And I think when we look at the reality on the ground in Gaza today, when we look at what happened over the past 20 months, when we ask about the scale of the killing, the methods that were implied, and the specific intent that you can read on Israeli news media. I work in the region for close to 15 years, and I have this weird hobby that I read Israeli news. You see this in all the public channels time and again, these intentional statements by high-ranking officials. So that's why I think it's important for me to
Nevertheless, if you look at the term, it is a legal term, and there's no court ruling till now saying it's a genocide. So, and you said, I'm a journalist, not an activist, but you're using it.
Right. I mean, I think as journalists, we need to ask ourselves the questions, what are we guided by? I think when I look at the German media sphere today, I think there's an incredible amount of credulity towards state narratives, towards when it comes to Gaza, when it comes to Israel-Palestine. There's a credulity towards Israeli state narratives and German state narratives. And I think we should be guided by a commitment to human rights, a commitment to international law, and when we look at the genocide case that South Africa brought in front of the ICJ last year, the majority of the court was convinced that there is a plausible cause.
But they used plausible, they didn't use genocide.
They haven't reached a ruling yet, that is true.
You mentioned German media. We have you here with us, Rainer, and it's nice to have you here with us. Based on different investigations, Amnesty International concluded that Israel is committing genocide against Palestinians in Gaza. Human Rights Watch, Israel's crimes of extermination, acts of genocide in Gaza. ICJ, a plausible genocide. Well, when I read the site, you don't use the term genocide as Hanno would do. Why and when would you use it?
Well, actually, I understand Hanno's emotions and also your reasoning. Mm-hmm. And when I hear reports, when I read reports about what's going on, I feel very, very shocked. But you cannot rely on the sources. This is the big issue. And
what do you mean?
The sources. I mean, Hamas makes statements, the official Israelis make statements, and the people on the ground, there are no journalists. There are local journalists under high pressure. There are NGOs and the official statements of Hamas and of Israel. So even despite those shocking reports, I would not use the term genocide for good reason. I have my PhD in public international law. I know that genocide is a very, very worst legal accusation.
But
and to establish genocide, you have to be on the ground, you have to make very, very deep investigation,
so
and then you have to evaluate it in legal terms.
Okay, but what
and
about,
nobody did it yet.
You talked about sources. So both sources you mentioned are a party within this war, and that's why you say there's no independent sources. But I mentioned Amnesty, I mentioned Human Rights Watch, I mentioned also the ICJ in Jan 2024 when they said the International Court of Justice, which found it plausible that Israel's acts could amount to genocide, which Israel vehemently denies. Is that not a source for you to rely on? The UN organizations who are in Gaza?
They are of the opinion that.
But the analysis of the ICJ was based on facts gathered. If anyone would like to join, welcome. And now we have a woman joining us. Do you have a microphone? No, do I have a microphone? Here is one.
You can take yours. You're a gentleman.
So if you, I'll just finish my sentence and then you can introduce yourself. So Rainer, to give you also the right to answer. So these sources are not enough for you.
Well, I understand the emotions, and me too. I'm very scared about what's going on there. Mm-hmm. But genocide is really the worst accusation you can make. Okay. And you know, Holocaust, or what the Germans did at the beginning of the last century in Southwest Africa, or what the Turks did against the Armenians when they sent them into the desert without food and water. This was established genocide. I do not know whether in the Gaza Strip this amount to
you had the
genocide.
opportunity, your point is clear, and thank you for clearing your point. Please, would you introduce yourself and you'd like to comment?
Milica Pešić, Media Diversity Institute, London, born in Belgrade, Balkan, Western Balkan, Serbia. I was a journalist in the region during the Balkan Wars, and even though I worked for public broadcaster Serbia, which was propagandist media, and lost my job and had all the problems with the police, beaten, arrested, hospital.
Let's stay at the point here.
We called it genocide, what was happening in Srebrenica. Even though there were no international organizations investigating, you know, when you see there were organizations calling it, and we would say according to so-and-so.
What are you relying on in calling it this?
Srebrenica, where at that time we knew that between 4,000 and 8,000 people were murdered. Mm-hmm. There were no official investigation done the way Gaza is not done yet, but there were organizations which were naming it genocide, and as a journalist we would say according to this organization what happened in Srebrenica, what is happening is genocide. Okay. And I think it's fair to use the same term if Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and what was the third one?
ICJ is saying plausible genocide.
Okay,
we have to differentiate.
I refer to particular human rights organizations because our role as journalists, as you said, is to fight for basic human rights in our work. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and democracy, inclusion is one of them, and fair reporting. So I don't have an issue with referring to reliable organizations qualifying what's happening in Gaza as genocide. Okay. So how did you call Srebrenica, what was happening in Srebrenica?
Well, Srebrenica, we all...
At the time.
There was evidence, there was real evidence that those 4,000 to 8,000 people were murdered. It was clear evidence.
Can I just, for a minute?
At the time of when Srebrenica was happening, there were no official investigation being done. There were assumptions, but there were reliable organizations which were using that.
Allow me to do things. To mention the facts that, according to the UN today, that we have about the numbers. I'll just find it. And meanwhile, till I find it, I would like to get the US perspective on it.
I was happy to stay out of it, actually.
I'll mention the facts. How would you report on it, Matthew?
As an editor, I much prefer conversations about journalism than about politics. And I think any one of you who works in newsrooms, probably most people in this audience, there's no more open nerve than the Gaza issue. And I just, having run a newsroom through the Trump era, I'm also aware of the high emotions that take over a newsroom. We're all people who are very passionate about what we do. We care about human rights. But I think there is a moment to take a deep breath and think about first principles. What are our responsibilities to our audience? Is it to have an argument over labels, or is it to inform? Is it to provide more original coverage? Is it to provide critical coverage and just be interesting? I don't find the genocide debate interesting in a journalistic context. I find it very interesting in an opinion context. You know, as a friend of mine, Shadi Hamid on the Washington Post editorial page said, "Call it a genocide." That's a great opinion article. It is not an argument about our craft and how we do it.
So, what role do journalists have now to give the context for the public? Because as I said at the beginning, it is words matter, headlines form the perception, the public opinion. Because I would just like to mention some of the facts. Because Rainer, you said. You doubt in the numbers, if I reminded
No, I do not doubt the numbers. I completely agree with what you say. It's not to us to express our opinions. It's not for us to suggest false certainties. It's for us to...
So what would the facts that we did use to describe what is happening? We focus now on Gaza. So would you agree to what the UN is saying, that more than 57,000 killed, among more than 17,000 children, 134,000 injured? If we look at the Israeli side, over 1,000 killed, including 33 children, and 5,400 injured, and still now we have estimated 50 hostages who are in Gaza.
Of course, we publish those figures.
Yeah.
This is our duty, this is our responsibility. But to evaluate, this is up to lawyers, this is up to the public, not
and scholars.
to us.
Can I just come back to this for just because I think personally...
I read a very good story, by the way, about this very issue. Let's read a story about genocide, why, in legal terms, I think just in journalistic terms, anytime you use a label that's so explosive, there has to be some consensus around this. There is no consensus around this in the public or even in the journalistic community. And at some point, if there is, sure, Holocaust, genocide, we all agree on that, right? We do, I assume. Okay, but at some point we have to come to a consensus, and that is a newsroom conversation. It's also a public conversation.
But when would you come to
this
It's a good
consensus?
story. Because he said he would wait till a lawyer or a court is ruling. Would you wait till then, or would you use it before?
There is a near consensus in the scholarly community of genocide scholars that there is a genocide taking place in Gaza right now. Amos Goldberg, Omer Bartov, Raz Zegal, Israeli renowned genocide scholar, Dirk Moses, Martin Shaw, you can go on and on and on. Like, the list is very long. They're saying this is a textbook case for genocide. Ethnic cleansing is exactly what is taking place in Gaza for 2 years in a row.
But there's a difference. Ethnic cleansing is not a legal term.
No, but it is setting
genocide is a legal term.
Forced displacement is setting the conditions for genocides to take place. Historically, that's always been the case, and that is what has been taking place in Gaza for 2 years. What I want to underline is that it's neither, for me personally, using that term, it's not a matter of emotion or opinion. It's actually none of the two. It's really important for me to kind of like base this in like what I see as my responsibility as a journalist, especially as like we have the source. You're right, Rainer. Many of the sources don't exist anymore because they've been targeted and killed. Over 200 journalists in Gaza have been killed targetedly by the Israeli military. Like, I think it's our responsibility in the West, as journalists who are observing what's going on the ground, to really convey the severity of what's going on and the complicity of our government.
Matthew? You say Matthew, and then Rainer, and then Melissa, and then we
come back to the origin of this crisis, of this war. It was on a sunny day, October 7 in 2023. You remember 1,200 people atrociously slaughtered.
I haven't forgotten.
Was this
I have friends who have lost family
well?
on that day. I have not forgotten that day at all.
But wait, just one thing. Would you call it a genocide?
Don't know.
Okay.
Know.
So you would also wait to see. Yeah. Okay. Matthew, you wanted to say something?
I mean, you say let's leave emotion out of this, let's leave politics out of this. This has been a purely emotional and political conversation so far.
But Matthew,
it has not been a journalistic
I just want to interrupt you for one
all.
second. You have been mentioning emotions. I think emotions are part of how we report based on facts. Why is always the emotions?
Okay, based on facts, then report. As an editor,
choice of
I love
words.
reporting. No, because by choosing the word, you're trying to end the argument. You're not trying to actually have a reasonable discussion about
Okay.
it. Okay?
Can we, like...
That is, it's an end, it's a genocide, period, and you want to stop talking about it. That is...
I don't want to stop talking about it at all. I just want to allow for a legal and scholarly vocabulary to be part of a broader discussion. And what we are seeing in Germany today is like is a kind of like preemptive acquiescence, that journalists are preemptively self-censoring due to like a sense of like an assumed kind of status quo Staatsräson that we are supposed to not say these forbidden terms. And what I would want is not for everybody to use a certain terminology, and we can have like differences of opinion 100%. I would want for there to be an openness for
Discussion for it, because
when
without...
when we look at the reporting today, we see that like the sources that are being reported, specifically news media, there's a huge disbalance for what sources are reported and for what sources are not reported. We see
Can
that,
you
like,
give me a very concrete example?
look at Die Zeit. Sorry for picking this example for now. But like a colleague of mine recently did this quantitative study where he looked at like hundreds of headlines. His name is Fabian Goldman. He looked at these headlines and he was like comparing kind of like the sourcing that was going on. He found that 36% of the news headlines articles in Die Zeit published were relying on Israeli statements by the Israeli military or Israeli government statements, whereas in comparison only about 5% were referencing Palestinian sources. So we see like this huge disbalance, which
But we have someone from that side, let him comment on
which
that.
I think is
Well,
representative of like what is going on more broadly in the German media.
How would you...
Well, you look at the headlines we did before this discussion, a scrutiny of how we reported about this conflict, about this war, and it appeared to us that it's pretty balanced. There are many more statements coming
You
from
did an
Israel.
internal one.
Yes, we did an internal
And
one.
what are the criteria that you came up with the conclusion that
Yes,
you are...
I mean, we have you can imagine, our editorial team is now at 600, and the most we have recruited the last years in Berlin. Very young editors, they are very political, and they are, in general, more pro-Palestine. And therefore, they have a big influence in our editorial team, so they brought in a lot of new insights, and it's a huge debate internally. What are the right words, where is the right balance in our paper, in our portal?
Mm-hmm. You wanted to say something, then we change if someone else is joining.
We are all here to fight for good journalism. The problem is, yes, we can say, yeah, we have to put the facts together. And I totally understand that. That's the basic. But it's so difficult to do it if there is LA protests, and then there are reporters there talking about the agency which is snatching human beings from the streets, claiming that they are criminals. Are we going as journalists to say, I'm not going to use word criminals because I have to check, I don't know that. So we have to use sometimes the terms such as genocide or criminals, maybe saying, according to this and this.
A big difference between criminal and genocide.
Huge difference, but both are very emotionally charged when human beings are behind suffering. So it's, you can put the terms aside, but it's very difficult to really do that in everyday reporting.
Okay. Thank you so much for joining us. Yes. I would love that you stay, but maybe someone else wants to join.
I think it's fair for someone else to take
Thank you
this
so much for joining us. You want to join us? Yeah, please. So now we are 5. Yeah. Okay. And you are, please introduce yourself. And
I'm Khaldoun Barghouti from Palestine.
Welcome. Is there something you want to comment on? Because I was just going to the next discussion that we're having. We talked about words, and then at the beginning I said that there's accusations against the so-called Western media that they are biased.
Yes.
Would you agree on that? Would you say, yes, they are biased from your perspective as a Palestinian?
I would say the situation is better now, but they are still biased. even in terms. The situation is better in the coverage. Now they are making better attention to what is really happening in Palestine. And they don't think that the root of the conflict now is the 7th of October. We have been living under occupation for decades. I'm 50 years old, and I lived 50 years old under Israeli military occupation. This is the origin of the conflict. It's not the 7th of October.
You are living not in Gaza?
In the West Bank.
In the West Bank.
In Ramallah.
Which is part occupied. Yeah.
Yes. So sometimes the backgrounds in the coverage is not mentioned. It is ignored. And they think that the history of the conflict starts on the 7th of October. That's not true. It should be mentioned that there are people living under occupation. I'm a journalist, but I'm a victim of the occupation. I have 230 members out of 4,000 members in the Palestinian Syndicate, journalists, who were killed in this war. 5% of the Palestinian registered journalists were killed. So when we speak about what is really happening there and is it genocide or not, sometimes in the Western media, they go to the book line by line where to make sure that they don't want to make a mistake that could convict Israel. But when we go to the other side, well, Palestinians are terrorists, for example. It is easy for them to use this term, but it's very difficult to point to Israel in accusation. The ICJ, for example, is, let's say, considering it somehow.
Okay. To understand your perspective better, can you give me an example that you saw in a Western media and you said, this is something that expresses what we are going through as Palestinian? Is there an example, or is there something where you said it was good?
You know, can you imagine that Fox News broadcasted a report about the hunger in Gaza? It's a change. Fox News in the United States, they had a report about the starvation in Gaza because of the Israeli blockade. This is a good turning point. If we go to Piers Morgan, he started defending Israel and he flipped. Now he is being accused of being anti-Semite, an enemy of Israel, Jew hater, and these things. In Israel, I speak, read, write Hebrew. I have a daily basis report I make about how Israeli media is dealing with the current situation in Gaza and Israel and what is the debate. You can't think of any of you saying as a journalist, an Israeli journalist called Berkovich, when he says, screaming, we must wipe Gaza off the earth. Just like someone said, you're bringing a charge for yourself. He said, we must wipe Gaza off the earth. Even when they tried to tell him not to convict himself of calling for genocide, he insisted. Who doesn't speak Hebrew may lose.
Unfortunately, you see this extremism on both sides. You see it on both sides of this conflict. But if we go and ask the biasing that in the Western is happening, or the accusation coming also from Palestinians, from different parts of the world, then the Western media that are here and presented, when someone tells you, yeah, you are biased, what do you do?
Actually, it's not our role as journalists.
I wanted to ask him, but okay.
It's not our
No, go ahead.
Our role as journalists to judge. It's our role to bring as many facts as possible, and the people judge and the lawyers judge, but not us.
So where do you think, where does the accusation being biased comes from?
Well, it comes from a bias.
Yeah, so you're admitting that...
It comes from a bias. If you are pro this, you're saying that, well, they're anti what I believe in, and that, I mean, it's amazing how you have the mirror images of almost any... I'll use a different example than Gaza. You know, a lot of people who hate Trump sound very similar to people who love Trump.
But Trump is a
and I think that the danger for... The wonderful thing about being a journalist, I've always thought, is that you can approach a country, a conflict, with a relatively open mind. Doesn't mean that you leave your heart behind, doesn't mean you leave your brain behind, but you come in and you say, hey, what is the most interesting story I can tell here? I'm competing with my colleagues, I'm trying to challenge my audience, I'm trying to surprise my audience. So the kind of reporting I love to see about.
But that's on a very theoretical level, Matthew.
But
we have very
concrete
concrete examples of being.
I'll give you a concrete example. I'll give you sort of example of I would read, and I have seen really good reporting about how Hamas has terrorized people in Gaza, and there is rising opposition, actually hugely unpopular in Gaza. They've murdered people who are even suspected of being collaborators. Similarly, I would read a really good story out of Jerusalem about it's a democracy, by the way, so I would read a really good story about the dynamics within the coalition. Where does Bibi stand now? There's a far right which is in power. That's what I mean by journalism. It's not an argument about who's right, who's wrong. Anytime we talk about pro or con, we have lost the journalistic debate. Okay, we have lost it.
This is a point I wholeheartedly agree, and I think we shouldn't frame this entire quote-unquote conflict within like a pro-Israel, pro-Palestine narrative, and really recenter it in like a question of like how do we approach our job? And like I think like one key issue here, and I'm happy we have Mr. Bakhouti here on the panel because it's indicative of like the fact that like Palestinian voices are so often marginalized and so many panels happen without them. So I'm happy you're here now. But like I think one key issue is language, and like we see time and again, especially in Germany. Germany is really a looking glass into these biases, as you mentioned. Like, and I think we see the way in which Palestinian death is described with passive language, whereas Israeli death, rightfully so, is described in active language. They are brutally murdered because they were brutally murdered by Hamas. However, Palestinians being killed by bombs, often we don't even have like an image of who dropped the bomb. We don't know what actually took place. They die as if they were hit by a tsunami wave. These are things that are structural. They're not matters of opinion. They're not matters of like a few bad apples. They're structural biases and imbalances that we see time and again, and we would never see them in Russia and Ukraine. We would never see them in other conflicts in which there's like the equally quote-unquote objective job to take place by journalists.
I'd like to thank you for joining us so we can switch again. It was good that you're here and we hear your voice. Thank you so much. An applause for him, please. I'd like to add a concrete example. There was a report on Al Jazeera English, and maybe it shows how things might be happening. You agree or disagree. They did a report and talked to different journalists anonymously. One of the journalists said there was a period of time when CNN journalists couldn't call airstrikes in Gaza airstrikes unless unless we had confirmation from Israelis. We would not be doing this, the same journalists, we would not be doing this in any other place. We would not tolerate the need to ask or wait till the Russians say whether they bombed a hospital in Kiev or not. CNN denied these allegations of bias and say that's not true. But you have different examples, journalists I even talked to. Where does this come from? Why is it like this?
I just wonder in that case whether that was following the bombing of the hospital early on in the conflict, where Hamas said that was an Israeli bomb, 500 people died. It turned out what it was a Hamas missile that misfired, hit a hospital, but ended up hitting a parking lot in a hospital where 50 people died. So there was a reckoning after that in the media. This is a very hard conflict to cover. One, because journalists are not allowed into Gaza.
Al-Shifa, or which hospital?
Yeah, I think
but it also showed that there was Israeli firing on Al-Shifa hospital. That's not entirely true.
No. But that was clearly a nodded Israeli missile, but it was reported as an Israeli missile strike initially, and then he had to kind of walk it back after the fact. My point here is merely that.
But the facts you're mentioning are being.
Well, the facts are being manipulated by every side in this conflict. And because there are no few journalists on the ground in Gaza, it is an information war, primarily an information war that's playing out on social media more than in established media. Then I think it's a legitimate conversation to have in a newsroom to say, how do we not get manipulated by, be it the IDF or by Hamas or whomever, in a conflict that has as intense as this one, emotionally and politically speaking.
I think just on this point, I think that almost the entire medical health infrastructure in Gaza has been destroyed by Israel, with the claim that there supposedly are Hamas, commando centrals underneath those hospitals. These are claims that have been disproven time and again by serious journalists, not the ones that go embedded into Gaza and do these kind of no.
And proven as well.
I mean, show me an example.
According to UN, 70% of the structures are destroyed in Gaza.
This has not been proven. I'm sorry. This is just not true. This is factually incorrect.
It is
and
factually
if we
true.
go, okay. I mean,
That's very interesting. Both facts.
For the record, we can check this afterwards.
Okay.
But let's say that there was Hamas commandos. Let's for the theory. Let's invoke your theory. Is it legitimate to bomb the hospital? Is it legitimate to take into account, let's say, hundreds of civilians in order to kill one commander, as 970 magazine showed last year, through the use of AI technology, that hundreds of civilians have been time and again seen as collateral and killed in Gaza? This is the facts. I'm sorry. This is not something we can kind of argue away. And you're asking the question, where does this come from? I think it comes from a sense of we're dealing with an quote-unquote ally here, and we don't apply the same parameters. And especially in Germany, it comes with a whole kind of set of, we market checkbox, we love Israel, thereby we kind of virtue signal that we're not anti-Semitic. It comes with a lot of reductionism and a lot of a huge lack of knowledge of the facts on the ground and the region.
Which is a strong voice of a Jewish community in Germany. There's an article where the author criticizes ARD and ZDF for part of its coverage, and they say this prevents a nuanced understanding of the events in Israel, and it also reinforces a narrative that leads to a one-sided perception and ultimately even to demonization of Israel. Then you read Über Medien, you read Über Medien, they did also an analysis, and they say caution and fear lead to media racism. When it comes to the victims in Gaza, there's a little empathy to be found in German media. So bias is coming from different sides are also criticizing it. And accusations
that may be
bias.
true, but it just doesn't come close to the facts that there is a structural bias towards Israeli state narratives in the German media environment. There might be different perspectives. There always are in every conflict in the world. There's different views on this, but the facts is that when we look at German media today, my generation, I don't know anyone in my circle that reads German media in order to inform themselves about Israel-Palestine. Not the West Bank, not Gaza, not anything. I don't know anyone. It's comedical. It's not serious. People don't read the German media in order to get a balanced
But accusations
view.
are also happening to New York Times, to The Guardian, to BBC.
Right.
It's not
you
only
have
the
some
German
other media outlets that are better, but that's the fact.
Let's introduce our new panelist.
So my name is Mohammed Shreiter. I'm the Beirut Bureau Chief at Deutsche Welle.
You're a DW colleague, to be transparent, to tell to the colleague, but we mentioned it, right? Sorry.
I'm the Beirut Bureau Chief at Deutsche Welle.
Yeah. Applause for Mohammed. He's doing an amazing job.
I just want, it's a very interesting panel. I just want to say that while Rainer is waiting to collect evidence to call it genocide, which is maybe justified, maybe it's also justified for journalists like Hanu to come up with their own assessment of the situation, because everyone is watching thousands of people being killed live streaming, so while international journalists are not allowed to go to Gaza. So how about Israel allowing international journalists to go to Gaza and then maybe collecting evidence whether there is genocide or not? But also I just wanted to say, because the panel started with a nuance, that it all started on a sunny, beautiful day on October 7th. And that's not, this is no longer, no, please, this is not a, no, but even this war, it's nuancing that this is started on a sunny Sunday or Saturday is not something that we journalists should give the nuance of, because it's quite offensive, especially for everyone in the region.
Did you see the videos? Did you see the videos of the webcams of the Palestine terrorists?
Yeah.
Did you see those videos?
Well, not Palestine terrorists. They're Hamas terrorists, if I may. But what you just did is nuancing that it started on you used the word a sunny day, and that is becoming offensive for people in the region. And that is putting a barrier between people in the region and Western media. And this is what we don't want to do. I mean, this whole debate, whether we, connect the dots and report unbiasedly for everyone, and especially for people in the region.
But we agree that it was an atrocious massacre on this day. We agree on this issue?
Yes, of course.
Yes.
But is it a massacre, what is happening in Gaza now? Oh, we can't agree on that. Can we? No, it took you too long to answer. That's the problem. You don't need to think for 10 seconds to answer when you already implies that what happened on October 7 is a massacre.
Who started it?
Okay.
It didn't start on a sunny Saturday.
It
didn't start.
The good thing is
we have a tendency to forget about
But this is offensive. This is not journalism. This is offensive.
Tendency to forget about this.
I think every point, I think we mentioned that before, and every point was said. I still have a lot of questions. I would love to continue the conversation, but it's 12 o'clock and 48, and in my ear they are shouting and say we should finish at 12:45. Thank you, everyone.
We resolved everything? We resolved everything, right?
I think no. I think we did. I think no. But we heard different perspective. We tried to find, to listen to perspective. I think that's what we could say for today. I know I have to stop, I know. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today and sharing with us the panels. Thank you, Hanu. Thank you, Matthew, and Tanu Reiner. Thank you so much.